The writing on the wall. You've used that phrase. Almost nobody who says it knows the man it actually happened to, or that a piece of that exact night may still be sitting in a museum dreer in London right now, waiting for someone to notice it. Outside the walls that night, an empire is already coming apart. Inside them, a king is laughing, cup in hand, certain the walls around him will hold no matter what's happening outside them. I used to think this whole chapter was just a dramatic legend, the kind of story that gets more impressive with every retelling and less true. Then I found out there's an actual clay object pressed by human hands 25 centuries ago that seems to know this king's name. Here's the problem historians ran into for over 100 years. Every Greek and Babylonian record said the last king of Babylon, the man on the throne the night the city fell, was someone named Nabonidus. His name was carved into temples across the empire, impossible to miss. Daniel never mentions Nabonidus, not once. Instead, the book names a king called Belshazzar, has him hosting a lavish banquet with looted temple treasures, and has the whole kingdom collapse under him that same night. For a long time, that mismatch was treated as settled proof the book got its history wrong, cited confidently, generation after generation, as a closed case. Belshazzar wasn't mentioned anywhere outside scripture. Then, in 1854, archaeologists digging through a ruined temple at Ur pulled 4 clay cylinders out of the ground. Picture the moment someone first turns one over, dust from a buried floor still clinging to it. Line by line, the cuneiform resolves into a prayer, a father asking his God to protect his son. The son's name is written right there in the clay. Belshazzar. One missing name, pressed into wet clay 25 centuries earlier, and overnight, the entire direction of the debate changed. So does that settle it? Not quite. A son isn't a king. Daniel doesn't call him prince or regent. It calls him king, flatly, the same word used for his father. So why does Daniel still call him king? That question sat open for almost 30 years, and the answer was already sitting in a drawer at the British Museum the whole time, catalogued simply as BM 35382, just not yet translated. Once it was, in 1882, it filled the gap completely. The record is called the Nabonidus Chronicle. It says Nabonidus spent nearly a decade of his reign living far from his own capital in an Arabian city called Tema. Absent from festivals a king was supposed to lead in person, year after year, while the capital simply waited on him. While he was gone, his son sat where a king sits, ran the army, received the reports, made the decisions that mattered. A second inscription, the verse account of Nabonidus, backs this up, describing the father handing his son command over the army of all the lands. That's not a ceremonial title handed down for appearances. That's the throne itself, in practice, held by a man the Babylonian record never quite calls king, until a foreign writer named Daniel simply did. History rarely hands you a clean, simple answer. Here, it hands you 2 things that are both true at once. A father still king in name, and a son already king in everything that mattered to the people living under him. If watching history and scripture confirm each other detail by detail is exactly your kind of rabbit hole, this channel does that every single week. Stick around, because it only gets better from here. The same chronicle goes further. It records where the actual ruler of Babylon was on the night the city fell. Nabonidus wasn't inside the walls at all. He'd marched his army out to meet the Persians at a city called Opis, and lost. A separate ancient historian, writing a couple of centuries later, places him even further off that night, holed up in another city entirely while his own capital fell without him. The man everyone had assumed was sitting on that throne wasn't even in the building. There's a real, honest debate still going among historians about the day-to-day details of exactly how father and son shared power, and nobody serious pretends that's fully worked out. But the century-old claim that this king was simply invented doesn't survive what these two artifacts say once you set them side by side, one naming the son, the other explaining why the son ran the kingdom in his father's absence. So picture the hall one more time. Golden vessels stolen from a temple this king had never laid eyes on. Torchlight against stone. Wine passed hand to hand. Music and laughter echoing off walls built thick enough that nobody in that room could picture them failing. 1,000 guests, cups raised, and not one of them glancing toward the door. And then, mid-toast, a hand with no body attached to it moving slowly across the plaster, forming 4 words no one in the room could read. The music stopped first, then the laughter, then the whole hall. The most fortified city on earth fell in a single night. The most confident man in it turned out to be the least safe man in the room. And the one name history had completely erased is the exact name the ground gave back 25 centuries later in his own father's handwriting. That's the writing on the wall. Not just 4 strange words on plaster 25 centuries ago, a pattern repeating itself in clay, in scripture, and honestly, in most of our own lives if we're willing to look. The walls we trust most are exactly the ones we stop thinking to watch. Most of us have felt that same kind of certainty about something. A job, a marriage, our health, treating it as permanent right up until the night it stopped being permanent. The clay can't tell us what was in that king's mind at the table, but Daniel's account can, and it says the warning was already written long before anyone in that hall was sober enough or humble enough to read it. Does knowing this history make Belshazzar feel like someone from a world completely unlike yours, or someone closer to home than you expected? I think most people land closer to home than they'd like to admit. History gave this king his name back. Scripture already knew what his confidence would cost him. And somewhere between those two, most of us will recognize a wall of our own we've stopped watching. If there's a wall in your own life you've stopped watching, tell me what it is in the comments. You don't have to name specifics, just the shape of it. I read every one. The chapter just before this one has its own furnace and its own forgotten evidence still sitting in the ground, waiting to be read the same careful way we just read this.